and welcome to this AJBL Connect webinar. I'm going to be your host for the next couple of hours. Just a couple of housekeeping bits before we get started. We do have chat functions, so if you'd like to ask us any questions, please add them to the chat functionality and we'll get back to you shortly after the session. We're going to have a 5-minute break in between sessions, so if you do need to grab a fresh cup of coffee, not a problem at all. We'll let you know when there's 5 minutes there just to take a quick break. We'll send feedback forms and so send CPD certificates and a copy of the slides after the session, and there'll also be a quick feedback, a couple of questions afterwards as well. So without further ado, make sure you've got your cup of coffee handy, and we'll jump into a business update and a quick review of the platform. Thank you. Hello and welcome to the AJBL Connect session. My name is Andy Witter. I'm the Business Development Manager covering the northwest of England. Just going to cover off a quick platform update today. So we're going to look at the progress of the business in terms of our quarterly results. We're going to have a look at some consumer duty stuff, which is a hot topic at the minute, and just have a run through in terms of one of our largest pieces of development work that we've got on the go at the minute. So without further ado, we'll just have a quick look at the half-year results. Nothing too in-depth here. So what we've got is just confirmation of in really kind of trying times for platforms and financial services in general, we've managed to put on 6% in customers and 6% in terms of AUA during the half year. And I appreciate it's difficult times out there for everyone, so we're really pleased to be making positive progress. We've got a bit of useful information down here in terms of the average Invest Centre customer, so 56 years old, £308,000 of assets, a little bit higher last year, unfortunately, due to markets having held us out there, and 1.23 accounts held on platform. And again, another thing that we're really happy with is the retention rate. So we're seeing 94.9% of clients staying with us. This compares with some kind of slightly different figures on the D2C platform. So the average client on the D2C platform is 43 and has just £71,000 worth of assets. So that kind of gives you an idea of the kind of customers we're seeing across the business there. In terms of the journey, we've seen fantastic compound growth since 2012 forward. So the last decade really has been fantastic in terms of pounds and pence growth and market share, and we've seen that on the up year on year as a business. So we're not focused on acquisitions, etc. This is all organic growth driven by advisors such as yourself. We're trying to increase our advisor base and also increase market share. So to everyone on this call today, thank you very much for your continued support, and it really is making a difference to AJBL as a business. Consumer duty. Now we had our staging date 31st of May. We've gone through now our assessment of value. We've also gone through our target market assessment. We've put all these in a nice handy consumer duty hub on the website. If anyone needs directions as to how to get there, let me know. But we've covered off the platform and the investment solutions that we offer. Over to you now really to kind of consume that information and drop that into your consumer duty assessments should the FCA ever come knocking. But we've, as a starter, we've had a look at the platform. So we've looked at every tax wrapper that we host on there, and we've assessed, does it offer a fair value in a number of sectors. Pleased to say across the board, we've assessed ourselves as good value overall. You'll see that there are a couple of blue segments in there. Just to give you a bit more information on those, one of the minor enhancements that we've kind of introduced as part of the foreseeable harm side of the consumer duty is to make sure that we've not got clients that have got excessive cash holdings. So where we do see clients with large cash holdings on file, we'll come back to yourselves just to make you aware of those. And any clients that are in potentially a pension contract where there could be better value on the other side. So we've got the SIP now for our kind of larger clients that are looking to do more bespoke investment, and our retirement investment account for our kind of small to medium sized clients. So we'll be signposting whether there are any clients of yours that might get a better deal on one of the products. So just some minor tweaks that we've made, but otherwise pretty healthy report across the board for consumer duty. on the platform. In terms of platform fees, what we've seen is kind of an average custody fee of 16 basis points. So our standard charge is 20, but obviously we do tier down from there. So what we have seen is the average client across the investment platform is paying 16, and we've got a fairly tight interquartile range around that. Nobody's paying massively less than 16 and nobody's paying massively more. So we feel that's in the current marketplace really good value for clients in terms of custody. In terms of the funds that we host on platform, what we've seen is an average OCF of 0.52, 52 basis points. There is kind of a fairly large spread around that, though. We've seen a kind of a 1% spread from the two interquartile ranges, so that there is still kind of a wide spread of fund management costs. We've also plotted our own funds on there, so the AJ Bell range of funds is coming in at 0.44. The growth funds are capped at 0.31, but the income and ethical funds do rate slightly higher than that, so that takes the average up to 0.44. But glad to see that that's coming in well below the average that we've seen in the marketplace of funds that are available. In terms of how it all stacks up, so what we're seeing is for advisors that aren't using a managed portfolio, we've seen the average custody fee of 16, the average fund costs of 52, and what we're seeing on the advisor charge side of things is an average of around 0.69. So that's stacking up at 1.37 total cost to the client. But again, we're seeing a large divergence below and above that number. No right answer, obviously, but it's all about value. What we're seeing with advisors that are using managed portfolios, again, still a divergence around that figure, but that does increase the average total cost to clients to 155 basis points. So just to take into account the FM fee, which is again coming around about 18 basis points if you look at those two numbers there. In terms of our investment solutions, we've had to assess each range individually. So I'm just focusing here on the passive range, but we have rated active, passive, responsible, etc. In terms of kind of assessment of the value. Pleased to say the whole range has been assessed as having good value to consumers across all these points here. Obviously, one part of that is performance. It's not the be all and end all, but there's no point being cheap if it doesn't perform very well. And what we're pleased to see here is actually looking at our passive NPS1, and again, what you'll see is consistently across the board we've got good performance. We are performing really well against our relevant IA sector. So not only is it cost effective, it is also performing really well for what you pay to our fund management team. In terms of NPS as a whole, again, what you'll see there, this is a chart that we've taken from Next Wealth. So you've got that kind of blue dotted area. That's typically where we see the vast majority of AMCs. That's between 0.5 and 0.9, regardless of size, which is interesting. You'll see that ours are averaging around the 0.3 to 0.34 marks. We're well outside that box in terms of cost in the right areas. So we are kind of consistently below the vast majority of total cost of clients that you'll see across the NPS market as well. Okay, just a quick look at onboarding. So one of the big piece of work that we've got on the go at the minute from a design perspective, but also from a development perspective, is to look at our onboarding. Rather than look at each individual area of the onboarding process, so rather than make illustrations a little bit easier, rather than make MiFID costs and charges examination a little bit easier, rather than make the input a little bit easier, we kind of focused on looking at those three jobs as actually forming part of one process at your end. So we've effectively rebuilt our new business process just to cover every aspect of onboarding. So what we'll have is a single point of data entry. You give us a piece of information about a client, and we'll use that for the illustration to instruct transfers, etc. We'll not ask for that twice. Access by multiple users. Some feedback that we had would be it would be really useful for multiple individuals to be able to access a single client when setting them up. So potentially power planning on day one, advisors for the client meeting, and possibly advisor support at the end to finish the job off. Again, that will be introduced as part of the new onboarding process. Origo transfer integration. exist in the new business process at the minute, but we'll still be able to kind of instruct transfers as part of the new onboarding process. A big one here, so fund-specific illustrations of costs and charges for our existing portfolios. We'll have a look at this slightly later in the demo, but essentially you just need to select a portfolio from the list. That will pull through the fund specifics and also the costs and charges, rather than having to do those two jobs separately at the minute. The ability to download all relevant documents post illustration. So at the minute, the documents for any clients that are looking to set up regular payments or direct debits, transfer forms, etc., they're presented at the end of the process. We've moved those so that they effectively sit in the middle, pre-advisor meetings. So that will give you then the ability to have any pre-populated paperwork at a more convenient point. Let's just run through some screenshots now of how this is going to look. First one is transfers. So again, you can instruct transfers via the onboarding process. So not only will this data be used to instruct any Origo compatible transfers, it will also be used to generate the illustration. So if you tell us the client's going to make a transfer in, we'll use that data to see if that's compatible with Origo, but we'll also use that to generate the illustration for the client. Investments, so again, I mentioned at the start, instead of keying in investment costs manually, you would just select any model portfolios or MPS that you've got access to. That will then pull through costs and charges for that portfolio and display those on the illustration itself. Client outputs, again, this will generate an illustration as part of the initial onboarding section. Any changes that you subsequently make will refresh that illustration and give you the ability to download those as and when you need them. And in the middle of the process, I mentioned what we've got is the ability to download multiple documents. So you've got your illustrations, your key information packs, and again, some of the information that's useful at product level, so key features, T's and C's, transfer forms, etc. So you'll be able to select as many of those documents as you want, zip them into a zip folder. If you want to print them off, fine. If you want to email them across to the client for them to take a look at, not a problem. They're available to you to do exactly what you need to do with. We've also got a kind of a chat function available as well. So if anyone's got any questions on this, feel free to send them through to the chat function, and we'll get back to you with the answers. But that's the end of the presentation from me. You've got some great sessions to come. Thanks for your time, and any questions, please feed them back via the chat function. Thank you. Pleased to introduce our next speaker, our Senior Technical Consultant, Joshua Croft. Josh will be looking through the implications of the lifetime allowance fallout following recent announcements from the government, look at the implications of removing the lifetime allowance, how this affects clients with protection, and what post-lifetime allowance pension landscape might look like from 2024 onwards. Over to you, Josh. And again, any questions for the session, please make a note of those in the chat function as we go along. Thanks.
Morning, welcome to today's session. I'm Joshua Croft, Senior Technical Consultant here at AJ Bell. And in my section here, we're going to cover off the changes to the lifetime allowance. So since the budget announcement, we've had quite a few pieces of change that are coming into the lifetime allowance. We're in a situation now where we've got this kind of transitional year, so I'll cover off the rules that have been announced that are in place for this tax year, and then look forward to what might be happening at the following tax year as well. So as I say, we'll cover off the situation as it is currently. I'll cover off the changes that have been made to the LTA protections. There's quite a few issues around those and some interesting points to raise. And then I'll try and look at what the post-pension LTA landscape will look like. So from next April, where we have the full removal of the lifetime allowance. So going back to the budget on the 15th of March earlier in the year. So obviously we get a budget each year. Covers off various aspects of tax planning and the economy in general. But this year it was a very pensions heavy budget, which it hasn't been for a few years. We've had relatively stable pensions policy over the last few years. But as I said, pensions were featured very heavily in this budget. So we had increases to the majority of the pension allowances. So the annual allowance was increased by 50% to 60,000. The money purchase annual allowance also increased back up to its original 10,000 level. and then the maximum tapered amount as well increased to 10,000. And they also adjusted the adjusted income threshold as well, putting that up to 260,000, with the hope that that will remove more people out of the taper trap that people tend to fall into. So that was all pretty widely expected. There've been briefings about they were going to tinker with the allowances, those kind of things. So we kind of expected that. Didn't know the exact numbers, but that was kind of in line with what people were generally expecting. On the lifetime allowance, we were also expecting an increase in that. So I think it was briefed and talked about beforehand. I think we were expecting a figure of around 1.5 million or 1.8 million, the LTA being increased to, but they didn't do that. The Chancellor announced that they're actually planning on abolishing the lifetime allowance in full. So that did come as quite a big shock for most people. I don't think anyone really was expecting the full removal of the LTA, because it's obviously quite a big change in pensions policy. Since A-Day, we've had the kind of the annual allowance and the lifetime allowance being the two kind of limits on pension savings, always kind of working together. So now we're going to move to an area where we have no upper cap on pension savings in the future. So it's quite a big change, and it did come as a shock to most people. So if we look what's actually happening this tax year, so the lifetime allowance is going to be removed, but not until next tax year. So in this tax year itself, 23-24, there's no change to the lifetime allowance itself, so it is still in place at its current level of 1,073,100. And pension commencement lump sums, the PCLS tax-free cash amount, that is still going to be limited to 25% of the individual's LTA, up to a maximum of 268,275 figure. So that hasn't changed. There's also benefit crystallisation events, so they still need to continue as they have done previously. So providers will be required to calculate LTA usage at each crystallisation, and they'll also need to provide the member, the clients, with details of that crystallisation, how much LTA they've used. And that also still means they'll require members to provide LTA usage elsewhere back to the providers as well. So nothing's really changed from that perspective. It's kind of everything as normal. But the big change that was in the Finance Bill, which is now the Finance Act, so this is all in legislation now, is that there's no longer going to be a lifetime allowance charge if an individual does go in excess of their LTA. So you can now go over your lifetime allowance, and essentially there's no penalty for doing that. So last year we had, and since kind of A-Day, we've had the LTA tax charges of 25% if you had an amount over your LTA, but you put that into, designated it to give you an income. So if you designated it into drawdown, in the old style, you would pay a 25% initial charge, and then you'd be able to draw from that drawdown pot of your LTA excess. So that 25% charge has now completely been abolished. So if someone is over their LTA, they can designate those funds to drawdown, and there's no penalty for doing that. So it's completely LTA tax free. So it just goes into their drawdown pot, and then they can obviously draw it from that pot, and they'll pay income tax on that. With regards to the 55% charge, so this was applied when someone took out their LTA excess as a lump sum. That was 55%. If you chose to take it as a lump sum, the 55% charge itself has been abolished, but it's been replaced now with income tax at the recipient's marginal rate. So this applies to 4 specific types of lump sums that are listed here. So we have the serious ill health lump sum. So if someone takes a serious ill health lump sum payment, if there's an amount that's excess of their LTA, they will pay income tax on that excess. I don't think we'll see too many cases of that, because someone in serious ill health usually has less than 12 months to live in order to be eligible for that. So I'm not sure how many of those people would be drawing all their pension out in one go, but it is one of the lump sums which is covered by this. The next one on this list, the lifetime allowance excess lump sum. So this was the old school way where if someone did have an excess of LTA, they just wanted to take it out in one go, they would pay 55% on that. That no longer exists. If they take that lump sum out, they'll pay income tax at their marginal rate. And again, I don't think we'll see too many cases of this, because it would probably make more sense to designate those funds into drawdown, don't pay any charge, any tax at that point. You'll obviously pay income tax when you withdraw it from the drawdown pots, but you can probably manage it a bit better with the allowances rather than just taking it in that one-off lump sum, but it still is an option available. And the last two here relate to death benefits, so the uncrystallised fund lump sum death benefit, which is from DC schemes, and then the equivalent in the defined benefits world as well. And so these are the ones I think might cause a few issues, because sometimes it will be unavoidable for taking one of these lump sum death benefits. The reason it would be unavoidable is on death, pensions can be either designated into an income to provide a death benefit pension for the beneficiaries, or taken as a lump sum. In most cases, it would make sense to take it as a pension because, again, you can manage it within allowances, those kind of things. But the option to take beneficiaries drawdown is only available if you're a dependent, which is a spouse, civil partner, or if you're a dependent child under a certain age as well, so young children who are dependent on the individual who died. So they can take beneficiaries drawdown, and it also applies to anyone who's been nominated by the member, so they become a nominee, so they're eligible for beneficiaries drawdown. So if you're not a dependent or a nominee, you don't have the options to take the death benefits as a pension, so you'll be forced into taking it as one of these lump sums. And obviously there's an LTA excess included within that lump sum. You'll have to pay income tax on that excess because of these rules and the way that they've come in. So this is just to re-emphasise it's really important that clients do have up-to-date nomination forms, because if the individual's been nominated by the member, then they'll be entitled to receive the pension, the death benefits as a pension, and they can potentially avoid going down this route of having to pay income tax, particularly if it's a large sum that's going to be in excess of the lifetime allowance. The next point on here is death and service payments. So I'm sure you'll all be aware that group life schemes are usually set up as registered pension schemes, and because they just pay out death benefits, the way they pay those benefits is through this uncrystallised lump sum death benefit. And again, if there's an excess of LTA, there'll be income tax to be paid on that LTA excess. So most of you will be familiar as well, usually have a registered group life scheme and an accepted group life scheme, which isn't a registered pension, so it's not included for LTA calculations. And I think initially we might have thought getting rid of the LTA would mean we can simplify death and service schemes by getting rid of these accepted group life schemes, but they will still be relevant for now because of this LTA excess issue with the income tax being payable. So if people do have higher fund values, higher salaries, they may be better off sitting in one of those accepted group life schemes, so their beneficiaries aren't having to pay this income tax on their LTA excess that's in any lump sum. And the last point on here, just to sort of, it kind of muddies the water on pensions and death benefits. So previously we've been able to say that if you die pre-age 75, your loved ones, your family can receive your pension benefits free of any income tax if you die before age 75. That's not technically correct now, because if there is any LTA excess contained within the death benefits, and if the individual has to take it or chooses to take it as a lump sum, that amount will be liable for income tax. So it does just confuse pensions a little bit more, makes it a bit more complex for the average client to understand. So just adds that extra complication, unfortunately. So just to put this into an example, then I've just got a quick case study here just to illustrate this point. So we've got Bernard, Brenda and Belle. So Bernard has a SIPP worth £1.7 million, and he hasn't completed any nomination form. He unfortunately dies age 63, leaving his wife Brenda and his 45-year-old daughter Belle. So they both would like a share of his SIPP, and they can contact the scheme administrator. The scheme administrator can use their discretion, and they're happy to award them the death benefits at their discretion. So if we come to see what form those death benefits can take, so looking at Brenda first, so Brenda was married to Bernard, so she by definition is a dependent. So she's eligible to receive her share of the death benefits and designate those funds into beneficiaries drawdown. So she receives her half of it, 850,000. That gets designated into the beneficiaries drawdown pot, and because Bernard died pre-age 75, she can draw income from that pot free of any income tax. So she's got a pension pot there she can draw from and not have any tax liability on it. Moving to the daughter Belle, so she's not a dependent because she's over the age requirements for that, and because Bernard hadn't completed the nomination, she doesn't qualify as a nominee either, so she's not eligible to receive the death benefits via the beneficiaries drawdown. Her only option available is this uncrystallised fund lump sum death benefit, and because the amount is over Bernard's original LTA, her share is going to include an LTA excess amount, which is then going to be liable for income tax. So she's going to receive her lump sum of 850,000 as a gross payment from the scheme administrator. Initially, when HMRC announced these changes, they wanted the scheme administrator to deduct income tax before they paid it to the beneficiaries, and there was a bit of pushback on that because it was going to be quite a complex process for scheme administrators, because we don't always have the tax position of the individual, These payments don't typically go through the normal PAYE systems. So HMRC did change their mind on that to make things a bit simpler. So the scheme administrator will pay it as a lump sum. It's then up to Belle and the legal representatives of the estate to settle any income tax charge directly with HMRC. So if we look at what this actually means for Belle, so we're assuming she's got a salary here of 45,000 from her employment. She's then receiving the LTA excess amount, which for her works out at £313,450. So that gets added to her taxable income for the year. Because of the size of that lump sum, she's gone over the limit where she's lost all of her personal allowance. So that brings all of her income into the tax bands. There's no tax-free element anymore. And it gets charged at those various rates within the tax band. And you can see quite a high proportion gets put into the additional rate band of 45%. So her total income tax on the back of this is going to be £147,505.50p. So quite a significant tax charge for her. And again, this is all because she wasn't nominated and she didn't have that option of designating those funds into a beneficiary drawdown pot, which could have avoided this tax payment altogether. So again, just to re-emphasise that nomination forms, expression of wishes, really important. Clients have got those completed and that they're regularly updated as well to make sure that they do are a true representation of what they want to do with their death benefits, because it also has a tax planning aspect to it now as well. So if we move on to the protection regime, so initially you could have been forgiving with thinking that with getting rid of the lifetime allowance, so you could get rid of the quite complex LTA protection regimes and the various different changes over all the years, but it's not going to be as simple as that, unfortunately. So as part of the announcement, the Chancellor confirmed that the maximum PCLS payments, tax-free cash now going forward, will be £268,275. However, anyone who had one of the lifetime allowance protections, which gave them an entitlement to a higher lump sum, would still be entitled for that higher lump sum, providing that protection was in place before the 15th of March, which was the day of the budget announcement. So anyone who does have any of the enhanced or the fixed protections will retain that right to that increased lump sum that is available to them, which seems fair and that all makes sense. But what was also confirmed, which again was quite a big shock, it was that anyone who does hold the protections will now be able to start restart making contributions and having benefit accruals, and they'll still be able to retain that protection, so they'll still be able to have that higher tax-free cash entitlement. So previously, these individuals with protection, they could no longer make contributions, and that was the deal for retaining that protected lifetime allowance, protected lump sum amount that they had. But that rule's now gone, so people who perhaps haven't been able to contribute for a good few years now have that option available to them, and they'll still retain that higher lump sum that is available for them. So if we just work through the various protections that have been around, so starting off with the original enhanced protection, so this is with no protected lump sum, so just the standard enhanced protection. They'll have the PCLS entitlement of £375,000, or 25% of the amount crystallising, whichever is lower, and any contributions paid after the 6th of April can be included in that calculation. For FP12, the highest lump sum available will be £450,000, so this was back when the LTA was at 1.8 million. So again, they'll be able to entitle to that 450 amount for them, and they can continue contributing to build up extra pension, but that won't necessarily give any extra lump sum. FP14 back to the 375 again, and then the last of the protections, Protection 2016, they'll have their lump sum entitlement of 312,500, and again, contributions can be included in that are made from April this tax year. So moving to the enhanced protection with protected PCLS, so this was for people as at A day who had large pensions that they could protect, but they also had large lump sum entitlements, which eligible they could protect those as well. So these are expressed as a percentage amount of their LTA protection. So they have a PCLS tax-free cash entitlement, which is a percentage amount, not a monetary amount. Because it's a percentage, they had to do something within the rules to prevent people from essentially building up large pension funds and giving themselves more tax-free cash entitlement. So what they did as a workaround to this, they'll still have retain their right to their protected PCLS amount, but PCLS for these individuals with this specific lump sum protection, their lump sum is going to be capped at the maximum that was available at the 5th of April this tax year. So a valuation will need to be done, and then that then becomes their protected lump sum amount, regardless of whether they make any contributions or not. So a quick example of this again. So someone with a lump sum protected amount of 30%, their 5th of April valuation was 1.8 million. So their max PCLS entitlement is going to be £540,000, regardless of whether they contribute or not. So the PCLS for those is going to be the lower of 30% of the amount crystallised and £540,000. So if the fund value drops, they might potentially get less than 540 because it's the lower of those two figures. And again, that entitlement remains the same regardless of whether they make any contributions or not. So this wording of this particular rule, PCLS is the lower of the percentage or the amount crystallised, and what their 5th of April value is, does actually create a slight wrinkle in the rules, which I'll try and illustrate with another case study here. So here we've got Jason. He's 73. Back in 2006, he applied for enhanced protection when his pension was worth £1.41 million. At the same time, he applied for the tax-free cash lump sum protection, and he was awarded a lump sum protected amount of 28%. So that's the amount that will be recorded on his enhanced protection certificate. He's got 28% lump sum protection. So fast forward to April this year, his SIP is now worth £2.8 million. He's read about the new rules. He's interested in making a further contribution now that he knows that he can without losing the protection. So his question, what we're going to look at is, if he does contribute an extra £100,000, how much tax-free cash could he take later in the year if he decides to crystallise? So if we look at the numbers on this, so he makes that £100,000 contribution, has a little bit of fund growth. So by the time we look at April, look at taking these funds, his value is now increased to £3 million in December. So if he crystallised all of his funds, the tax-free cash that he's going to be entitled to take is going to be the lower of 28% of the 3 million current value, which is 840,000, or 28% of the 5th of April value, which is 784,000. So that's going to be his limited amount because it's the lower of value. So 784,000 is going to be the lump sum he can take out based on his protection. So where I said there's a wrinkle in the rules is, this is if he takes it all out in one go, if he crystallises the whole pot. But if you did a split crystallisation, say do 1.5 million each time, each one of those crystallisations, he'll be able to take 420,000 tax-free cash, because 28% of 1.5 million is lower than his monetary amount of 784,000. So that's within the rules because it's the lower of figure. But if he does that twice, it's within the rules, but he's given himself a total tax-free cash of 840,000, which is more than the amount than if he would have taken the pot all in one go. So as I said, this is a little bit of a wrinkle in the rules. I don't think this was considered when they were putting this policy in. It is a bit of a loophole, really. So whether HMRC will look at this and look at closing it down, it's a relatively niche scenario, I appreciate. I'm not sure how many individuals there will be who have enhanced protection and are fully uncrystallised, who will be able to make these crystallisations. But it just to illustrate that making these pension policy decisions quickly, there's always kind of unforeseen circumstances that can arise. So whether they'll look at closing this loophole's probably up for debate, but it's just an interesting one there, that it's something that is doable within the rules that does seem a little bit like a loophole. And the last point on protection, so the older forms of protections all had closing dates back in their retrospective years, but the applications for fixed and individual protection 2016 are still open. There was never an end date actually given to those. So technically, if the individual is eligible, they can now take out fixed protection 2016, for example, and that would still give them the enhanced PCLS entitlement of £312,500. They do need to be eligible, though, to be able to get that protection, which does mean they haven't made any contributions or had any benefit accruals since April 16. So again, there might not be too many people falling into that category, but if they are, then they will be able to get a higher lump sum entitlement than they otherwise would have been. But if people do this and do get granted the protection, if they do make contributions, that will break their protection because they applied for it after that 5th of March key date, 15th of March, I should say. So essentially the old protection rules do apply to them, and so any benefit succession events will break that protection and they'll go back to the standard. So just a point there on late applications. So that's the majority of the stuff that was announced in the recent finance bill, which became the Finance Act. So we know kind of how things are going to work for this tax year. So we're trying to look forward to what's going to happen next tax year when we have the full removal of the lifetime allowance. It becomes a bit more difficult because we haven't had any firm details on how it's going to work currently. So all we actually know at this stage is that the lifetime allowance is going to be abolished, so it's going to be gone completely, and that maximum PCLS is going to be frozen at the current rate of £268,275. So that's all that's been confirmed so far. The actual mechanics for the removal of the LTA are still up for debate. We don't know the exact mechanism they're going to use for removing the LTA, and we also don't know which bits are going to be completely removed, which bits are going to be replaced with something else. So if we just look at the Finance Act 2004, FAO4, so this is obviously a huge document that covers lots of different aspects, but it's kind of the main place for a lot of the pension legislation that we still use today, because this is where the legislation that set up the pension A-Day rules does actually come from. So the annual allowance was introduced in this, and the lifetime allowance was introduced within this Act as well. So a lot of the rules that we still rely on are covered in this Finance Act. And if you just look through this Act itself, if you just do a quick search for lifetime allowance, there's hundreds of references to the lifetime allowance included within the Finance Act. So obviously, if we're looking at removing the lifetime allowance, each one of those mentions has to either be removed or amended and replaced with something else. So it's an absolutely huge job for the Treasury, for HMRC, to go through, remove all mentions of the lifetime allowance, and in some cases replace it with something else. So there's a lot of questions about how that's actually going to work. HMRC have set up a working group to start looking at these changes. They've asked industry to contribute to that working group as well, so we have a couple of colleagues who are sitting in on that. They've had a few meetings so far, and apparently they've been very useful. We're starting to see what it is going to look like, but we've had no kind of firm kind of policy statements yet at this stage. There's no timeline yet either for getting an idea of when we're going to actually be able to see these rules. We're hopeful though that we will have sight and understanding of how the rules are going to work way ahead of the new tax year next April, because obviously removing the lifetime allowance is a big job from the policy perspective as well, but we've also got things like systems, lots of changes from the provider perspective, but also advisors as well. We need to know what position we're going to be in for April next year. So we're hopeful we'll start to see what the rules are going to look like. As I said, there's no official timeline yet. Hopefully they will publish one shortly, but we're kind of hopeful we'll get some sort of draft rules maybe around the autumn time. If they do put any draft rules out, that will probably go to a short consultation as well, so we'll be able to feedback on anything that we're not 100% sure on, or things that we think might lead to other issues. So we're hopeful we will have that timeline to actually implement the changes that do come in. So mostly now we just have kind of questions on how things are going to work. So things like how PCLS is going to work in the future. So we're switching from an amount that is limited by the available lifetime allowance to this new monetary amount of PCLS, tax-free cash. So we're going to assume there's going to be some sort of PCLS reporting regime. So how much tax-free cash have clients taken from previous pensions? That's going to limit how much tax-free cash they can take currently. So again, that reporting requirements will have to be kind of designed and understood by everybody. There's also potentially going to be an issue around DB and DC pension lump sum and scheme pensions from DB side as well. So as you'll be aware, when you come to take your defined benefit pension, you typically have an offer of a large lump sum and a smaller annual pension, and you can commute that lump sum to give you a higher annual pension for the rest of your life. And currently, under the current rules, both of those use lifetime allowance in equal amounts, because the higher pension gets times by 20 to give its capital value and uses more lifetime allowance, so that kind of works out evenly. obviously, in the future where we don't have any lifetime allowance, if someone has a DB scheme, they would probably most likely take the highest amount of annual pension they can and then take their monetary lump sum from a DC arrangement, because that's going to be more financially beneficial for them. So you'd expect that they're going to have to build in some mechanism to prevent that happening. So we're going to have some kind of upper limit or some kind of linking the monetary amount to an overall limit to stop people kind of exploiting this new system. That upper limit's going to look a lot like the lifetime allowance currently looks and function in a very similar way. But you assume that they're not going to call it a lifetime allowance. They're going to replace it with kind of some maximum lump sum limit or something to that effect. So again, there's going to have to be something there that's going to be designed and understood. So again, we're just waiting to see what that is going to look like. And then there's just smaller things as well, things like uncrystallised fund pension lump sums, UFPLUS. Currently, you can take 25% tax-free up to your LTA. And again, if we don't have an LTA in the future, how are those lump sums going to work? Will they just scrap them all together? Or again, will there be some kind of upper limit that is going to restrict these types of benefit payments? So that's just a few off the kind of top of my head. There's lots of other things that the LTA affects, things that we haven't considered yet, things that HMRC, the policy people over there probably are just discovering as they're working on this job of removing the LTA. So yeah, it's a lot of work for them. But as I say, hopefully we'll see a clearer picture over the next few months as they start to inform everyone what it's going to look like next tax year when we no longer have a lifetime allowance. So that's some uncertainty around what the actual policy is going to look like, what the regulations will look like. There's also been a bit of uncertainty caused by the politics of all this. So this is Rachel Reeves, who's the Shadow Chancellor for the Labour Party. So when the Chancellor made the announcement in the budget that they were removing the LTA, the Labour Party's position instantly was that they don't agree with that and they would reinstate the lifetime allowance when they come into government. And they've reconfirmed that position on a few occasions now as well. So it does seem to be the position they've taken, which has led to this view from clients and advisors as well, that this removal of lifetime allowance might just be a temporary thing, which unfortunately is leading to kind of people taking decisions based on something that might possibly happen in the future, which is always not ideal, really. Ideally, you'd like confirmed pension policy to be understood for a long time. Having these chopping and changings of the rules isn't really helpful to anybody. So we've got a lot of people asking now, well, should I crystallise now while there's no lifetime allowance charge? Should I crystallise next tax year where there's no lifetime allowance at all? And they're really difficult questions to answer because we don't know what the future is going to be. We don't know if, there needs to be a general election, which, there's no set timescale for. The Labour Party have to win it, have to have a majority, you'd assume, to implement this policy. We don't know how the Labour Party would bring back in the LTA. Would they just reinstate everything as it was last year, or would they do something different? So there's so many unanswered questions. It's really hard to make any informed decisions based on these kind of speculative points. So should clients crystallise now? Yeah, as I say, it's quite a tricky one to advise on. Really, you can only advise on the rules as they are now. You can't really second guess what is going to happen. We've seen situations where a client may have crystallised up to their lifetime allowance and then might have had a pot of uncrystallised funds which they were just waiting to take the hit at age 75. There doesn't really seem to be any downside for crystallising those funds now while there's no LTA tax charge, just so they've got 100% crystallised funds. And then if there's any lifetime allowance reintroduction in the future, then there might be something to be dealt with then, but it might just be on the growth since the crystallisation. Again, we don't know, but that doesn't seem to be have too many downsides to it. But I think if it was someone who's completely uncrystallised, if they've got a large pension fund, taking benefits just because a future government might do something potentially in the future is probably more of a grey area that might have potential bad outcomes, because if you're taking all your tax-free cash out of your pension and you don't really need it, that's not necessarily going to be a good outcome. You're moving money from a tax wrapper, IHT protection in particular, into your estate. And again, if you're doing that just based on speculation and what could happen, it's not an ideal situation. And this uncertainty doesn't help those people with the protections who've been told they can now make contributions. What do they do? Are they going to be penalised if there's an LTA reintroduction? So they might be questioning whether they do want to make any contributions while we're in this kind of unknown stage. Again, it's really difficult to answer because we don't know what the future position will be. It seems that it would be quite mean really to retrospectively punish anyone who has made contributions, because they were just following the tax rules as they were at the day. So it doesn't seem feasible that they would penalise people for that. But again, we don't know, because we don't know what the full Labour Party policy would be if they do get elected again, all those kind of uncertainties. So again, the politics of this isn't really helpful, but hopefully we'll see a clearer picture as we approach the election and those kind of things. So that's everything I had. I hope that's been useful and cleared up a few points. If we do have any questions, feel free to put them through the normal channels. We'll hope to get back to you as quickly as possible. Any particular scenarios you wanted to go over, we're always happy to have a look and offer any help where we can. Thanks very much. Enjoy the rest of the day.
Next up is our new business development manager for the North for investments, Andy Adzed. So Andy is going to take a look back what's been driving global financial markets into 2023 and provide his thoughts on what the risks and opportunities are for the future. He'll dig into inflation and interest rates and outline what could happen next. And he'll also touch upon investor and market psychology and outline the importance of understanding investor behaviour. Ladies and gentlemen, over to Andy Adzed.
Hi, welcome to AJ Bell Connect. My name's Andy Adzed. I'm the Investment Business Development Manager, so I support the business development teams across the Midlands, the North East of England, the North West of England, Scotland and Northern Ireland. So I guess we'll start with some reaffirmation of our mission statement. Basically at AJ Bell, what we're looking for is simplicity, some transparent communication, and dare I say, an almost an obsession really about driving price down to end consumers to try and aid consumer outcomes. So simple solutions that are transparent and easy to understand. We feel that that's important because the communication channel between you and independent financial advisor world and your end investor needs to be an easy path to follow. And like I say, this almost obsession with low cost, which is great. Established in 2016, I guess the graph on the right shows you a little indication as to the journey that we've been on. Up to just short of 4 billion now in assets, and delighted to say that we've received some awards along the way. I guess the one that probably resonates with most people is the Citywire Advisor Choice Awards from 2023. So whilst you can win awards for different categories, winning one that's about investment outcomes and the most satisfactory investment outcome probably is the pinnacle of an award that you can win. So that's clearly about across different risk profiles, what the end consumer, the journey the end consumer goes on. And widening across availability across different platforms, I'll cover that off in just a second. So where can you buy our solutions? So clearly we'd be delighted if you bought it through AJ Bell Invest Centre, but the MPS range that we run and the fund range that we run are on a variety of platforms. You can see in so the top half of this slide, so Aberdeen Quilter, Aviva, Transact and Morningstar. The fund solutions, so the unitized versions of MPS, are then available on Aegon, Embark and Fidelity. So top line you can see MPS and fund solutions, and then sort of the bottom half of fund solutions only. So what does the investment team look like? So in terms of where assets come into our investment solutions, so just be mindful that assets come from, and a significant amount come from IFAs, from independent financial advisors and asset management firms, but a large proportion of the capital also comes from the D2C proposition that we run for lower value investors who perhaps have got either no desire to take advice or they don't feel as though their assets are large enough. So it's largely lower asset value investors that are invested in that range. So Kevin Doran, who's the managing director of the D2C proposition and the investments team, he's sort of the chap that oversees both propositions. Then in the IFA solutions, we've got Jamie Ward, head of investment solution. Brian Hughes, who I'm sure some of you may have met over the years, he's head of the research function and what we call investment partnerships. So advisory firms who partner with us and we co-brand and we manage their assets together. And then Sam Anderson, who's our head of investment operations. So quite a diverse team, 15 investment team members. And again, recruitment levels are good. So as assets grow and the requirement for additional staff takes place, then the team's probably in a growing phase, but still quite sleek and streamlined with that obsession with cost. So why I mentioned the D2C, in terms of the solutions themselves, there's a lot of capital. There's lots of low value investors that all want a solution that's built for them. So that's great from our perspective. It means that we're not just reliant on advisors and their recommendations. We've got two sort of strings to our bow, if you like, in terms of retaining the capital that's inside. So what does this investment team and journey, I guess, what's the governance framework look like? Probably is the question that may be on your lips. So our investment oversight. So unusually, I guess, you're going to start the description of this slide from the bottom. So on the left-hand side, you've got AJ Bell Investments. So there is a regular asset allocation forum to discuss the wider aspects of different asset classes and the impact of those asset classes on consumer outcomes. So that's an ongoing conversation. It's formalized quarterly. And then the next, if you like, red box along within AJ Bell Investments is the portfolio implementation forum. So the research function. So asset allocation one side of the research function as to what the assets that are going to be implemented into these portfolios, be that active, passive, blended, or in the responsible range. So two independent committees that run side by side. The first level of oversight then is on the right hand side, as you can see, AJ Bell Risk. So there's a risk forum, and the bottom layers of these conversations, these teams, if you like, and conversations are intertwined with each other. So think of this as the ideas section. Now, clearly, if I think it's a good idea, it would be hard for me to then decide that that's a bad idea straight away. So you always need somebody that's going to police the ideas process and lead out the generation of ideas for asset allocation forum. So the first element of that is that departmental risk, AJ Bell Risk. They're integral in the asset allocation forum process. But from that point in, the market homework, if you like, the ideas that are generated through strategic asset allocation and the funds that are inside from implementation go to the investment policy committee, and that's the sort of second level of oversight, I guess, if you like. First level risk forum, second level investment policy committee, and then on top of that, and the overarching governance is then the AJ Bell board. So one of the advantages of being FTSE listed, I suppose, FTSE 250 listed, is that sort of three-pronged approach. You've got the factory, the ideas factory that works alongside AJ Bell Risk, the homework then marked by the investment policy committee, and then the board across the top. Really important because, as I say, we've got investors who come to us directly through those lower value investors, and they're looking for a solution that would have oversight. So it's great in IFA world. It means we've built this risk policy, this investment oversight process. So what do we do? So the easy way, I guess, is that I'm very aware that different financial advisor firms use different risk profiling tools. So you can see at the top the AJ Bell brand. It's got MPS 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and 6 across the top. And two income solutions. So the two income solutions that you can see gaining popularity. So as the changes in yield have occurred, then income solutions maybe are coming more to the fore. So I'm sure that all of you are looking down that column and thinking, right, oh, dynamic planner, we use those guys, or no, we use EV, or so we've mapped all of these different solutions to different risk profiling tools. So pick out the one that suits you, I guess, that you're drawn to, be de facto, dynamic planner, etc., or Oxford Risk. And then if we pull down to where you can see the AJ Bell logo, so then on the left-hand side it'll say funds, passive, active, and responsible. So what have we built? Okay, so we've built a range of funds that are the CDOL coded versions, the unitized versions of our passive MPS solution. There are some subtle differences. It's easy for us to buy gilts directly if that's what we want to do in the fund range. Not so easy in a passive MPS solution, obviously, because you've got to buy a fund. And then we move down that list. So fund, unitized solution, probably gaining most traction currently are the changes in capital gains tax allowances. So CGT allowances are falling, and the idea of being able to control what that CGT liability is going to be is becoming more to the fore. So to explain that a bit better, holding a passive MPS proposition or an active MPS proposition is a rebalance that takes place. Then as the CGT allowances come down, maybe that would put us in a position where we'd be utilising some of that allowance. That allowance is now smaller than it was. And then, for example, I might take a withdrawal from a GIA to pay into an ISA 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9 months later. And again, use a little bit more of that CGT allowance and maybe find that the control of mitigating that gain can be becoming more difficult. So a lot of people are looking towards unitized solutions for that. So unitized fund range, passive MPS, and an active MPS, and then underneath this a blend, so what we call Pactive, which is a 50-50 blend of active and passive types of solution, and then a very process-driven, responsible MPS solution. So if you're into the governance, if you like, then we've got a solution for people who are looking for something that's responsible investing. The age-old question then is, well, what do these solutions cost? So it's again following the same pathway, funds at the top and passive MPS, active, blend, 50-50 and responsible. So usually the best place to start here is the passive MPS. So between 28 and 29 basis points, that's 15 basis points, which is the management fee for asset allocation and research and implementation, and then the underlying holdings on the top. So in the passive world, that's 15 basis points plus the underlying holdings that are between 13 and 14 gives us a total of 29. So it isn't 29 plus an additional 15. It's an all-encompassing cost there that you can see. So why start with passive? Because it's easy to talk about the fund proposition. So the fund proposition is capped at 31 basis points, so slightly more expensive than passive currently. Great story though in terms of fair value to the end investor. So those solutions started life about 6.5 years ago at 50 basis points, and as the funds have grown and we've been able to access different share classes, then the cost for those investors has fallen. So rather than us retain that margin, the cost for the end investor has fallen. The funds are slightly more expensive than the passive solution because that reflects currently the cost of hosting through value tracks. So if you're ever researching these fund solutions, they're named cautious, moderately cautious, balanced, as you can see at the top, and then you'll see a VT sign before, and that VT sign is the stands for value track, which is the firm that hosts them on a CDOL coded basis. If we move into active, you can see that there's a graduated cost. That's 56 basis points all the way up to that's close to 93 now, which again includes the management fee. The 50-50 blend, as you'd expect, is roughly in the middle of those two solutions. And then the responsible range, which is partnered with MSCI to ensure that the data that's screened in is making sure that we've got those responsible outcomes on a monthly basis. They range from 38 basis points all the way up to 44. So hopefully you can see there this again almost obsessive driving down cost for end consumers. Onto I guess some of the literature and the resources that are available. So on everybody's lips at the moment, obviously Consumer Duty. If you go into Invest Centre, then you'll find access to things like our target market, market assessments, fund market assessment, etc. So more of a signpost really that there's support available through something that's quite a poignant topic currently. Okay, so I'm sure over the course of the last 12 months, many of you thought, stop the world, everything's changing very differently. My low risk clients have got different outcomes than my high risk clients, but it wasn't what I expected. I just pressed stop. I want to get off and get time to reevaluate what's going on in the world. So I guess from the next sort of 20 minutes, 15, 20 minutes or so, we're going to be looking at what's happening, hopefully where do we go from here, so some food for thought, crucially some investor psychology, so what is it that triggers investors to behave perhaps erratically and not stick with the plan, right? So financial planning, that journey from investor in their human life, an event in their life, there's something that they're saving for, and then what we've been doing at AJ Bell, so what have our solutions been doing? So I guess it's fair to say it is an unexpected picture. So if we look to the right hand side, so just take a second to think about what's going on this graph. On the right hand side, you're going to see Japanese equities, European equities topping the charts in terms of performance. So the last 3 years to the beginning of May of this year, who'd have thought that Japanese equities would be the shining light and that European equities would be the shining light? So a little bit different perhaps than what we've been used to. Certainly hasn't been the story from pre-COVID and even post-COVID, where it's all about US equities and then UK equities. The top in the charts of Japan and Europe, so that's just a little bit different, and maybe it's caught people out with what exposures they've had in portfolios where Japanese equities have been perhaps ignored a little. And then this bond market, so we've all seen everything in the press from Liz and her government and the shocks and changes. So there's a stabilisation. You see there's a calming, there's a quieting on the right hand side in terms of what the bond market looks like. So which of the best performers? So in our world, we made a strategic change back in January. We diluted some of our equity positions in favour of high yield bonds, which is point A on the right hand side. So high yield has been the place to be, and indeed the second chart, if you like, sterling corporate. So again, there was a change. We went up the risk spectrum slightly to gain exposure in our fixed income holdings. So that's worked quite well for us this year. But the message on this slide is there's definitely a stabilisation in terms of bond market. So that's better news for end investors. And then never out of the press, I don't think, currently most days. I guess there'll be a reference if you listen to the radio or the TV or you browse on the internet, there's probably something that's utilising the word inflation in the rhetoric that's coming from anything that's financial. So I guess the question here is why have we seen this uptick in inflation? And we're looking at the left-hand side of the chart so far. So what we're looking at there is that grey band. And that grey band there, as you can tell, through 2008 was the financial crisis. And then we've got that sort of uptick, and then now we've got 2020. So now we've got COVID. And so total assets. Why all of a sudden have we seen this great peak of inflation? The impact of COVID, the impact of the capital that's been deployed into the market to prop up the COVID issues, and we all talk about the financial crisis as being colossal, yet here we are with a totally different position from an inflationary perspective now rather than then. The amount of capital deployed during COVID is just clearly unprecedented, and we're perhaps paying the price of that now. So the Bank of England, November 2022, the words coming out where the UK faces a very challenging outlook and we expect a prolonged recession. So it was a very negative message in November 22. The economy is going to be stifled. This challenging outlook. Fast forward only a few months. So now we're forecasting modest but positive growth. So a total step change. Well, that was only 6 months later. So in November 2022, it's a disaster, very challenging outlook. We're expecting this prolonged recession to forecasting modest positive growth. And then interest rates obviously have had to change to try and combat that effect of inflation. So You know, and there's plenty of people out there that are saying their interest rate's the best tool to which to combat the inflation that we've got now. Who knows? That's not one for today. That's probably a wider debate. But we can see there that interest rates have risen sharply, or are they just normalising? I guess, you know, if we were to look at that chart and draw a line through the centre, they're probably at more normal rates. If we went back longer term, interest rates have been historically a lot lower, but economy's changed, haven't they? Markets changed, so they're perhaps normalising. Should we have been thinking that interest rates were probably going to get closer to 5 or perhaps even 6%? Is that not more normal than, you know, the saver being getting no reward since 2013? So the best part of 15 years, interest rates have been suppressed. And where did he go next? So we can see that the general trend is down. So the US Federal Reserve, their summary of economic predictions from March, we can see that the trend is down. So if you look into the centre, the start of 2023, there's probably consensus there. There's a lot of blue dots that are all in a line. And then obviously that consensus changes a little, but the trend downwards, from my perspective, I'm looking at thinking there isn't a great deal of consolidated thinking though, so there are still, you know, outliers at the top, sort of 4 dots at the top. So the trend looks like it's down, but again, you know, is that certain? And then this slide will be perhaps a little startling, but it might help to aid some asset allocation decisions and some thought processes for asset allocation decisions. So if we're looking at those numbers globally, real GDP growth, the numbers don't make great reading. Perhaps if we look to the right hand side, emerging markets, developing Asia, the numbers look a little bit more healthy, and sub-Saharan and Africa, the numbers look a little bit more healthy there. It's interesting if we go back to 2008, and a lot of the language, the buzzwords, if you like, were all about BRIC. Brazil, Russia, India, China, and South Africa. It was all about BRIC. BRIC was going to be the place to be, and that's where you're going to make money. We've seen as high risk. So, whereas now the output from those BRIC economies, in comparison to the G7, is almost the same. So what we used to think was high risk and more of an emerging environment to invest in, it's very similar. It's emerged, if you like. You know, that output that we're looking at being the same as the G7, maybe a better global portfolio would have balance that was in that emerging market environment. So the yellow and the blue that you can see on screen, as opposed to the outlook for the United States. So a lot of this is probably to do with debt, unencumbered investment regions rather than debt-laden investment. So what do we think is going to be happening next? So clearly it depends on where interest rates stop increasing. I don't think the markets don't yet believe in central bank policy. Bond yields seem to be dictating policy. So where interest rates are going to stop, obviously nobody knows where interest rates are going to stop, but it's dependent upon where that cease occurs, I guess. Inflation, so inflation should fall back given energy price falls. So energy price falls are going to help obviously inflation come down, hopefully. But the inflation is probably likely to remain higher than it has been. So the Bank of England's estimated a 2% target probably looks very optimistic. I'm sure we'd have consensus there amongst most people. And private equity buying up distressed assets. So is there a sale now? Significant disconnect between developed and emerging market countries. Go back to this private equity, same in property funds. So recently there's been consolidation across property funds, where the investment trusts, so REITs, we found that there are firms out there that are buying huge increases, so 130 and 140% of the current share price, to buy up assets that look like perhaps they're on sale. Over to Taiwan. So again, in the market and in the news, Taiwan remains firmly in the sights of China. semiconductor production. 65% of the world's semiconductors are manufactured here. So there's potential there for huge global instability. The strong US dollar creating headwinds around the world. There's a suggestion that perhaps more banks will fail, but there'll be limited contagion. So the stronger banks becoming stronger as a result. And then this chap at the bottom, Mr. Putin, totally unpredictable variable. Who knows? I think never poke a sleeping lion, and certainly never annoy one that's caged. Does look like maybe he's a little more caged now, so possibly looking more dangerous than he had. So an impossible outcome to predict. But what are we doing to mitigate the risks that are on the table? So we've taken advantage of the yields being on offer, particularly in investment grade corporate bonds. So yields have popped up, capital values have fallen. That looks like an opportunity. So we've already taken advantage by changing our asset allocation towards those asset classes. There's a marginal increase in duration, but we're still short in comparison to the market. So we've still got shorter durations, less interest rate sensitive. So trying to get more predictable outcomes for those investors, particularly who are lower risk and have more fixed income in their portfolio. Providing something that's more predictable seems like a really, really sensible approach. We reduced our equity content in favour of high yield bonds. Again, the outlook for high yield bonds looks similar to, or in perhaps in some situations, higher than the long-term expected return on equity. So an equity sell down in favour of some high yield bonds across all portfolios. Profits taken from our position after an exceptional 2 years in energy. The energy position pretty much doubled. So profits taken, so that's great for the existing investor that consolidated the gains that they made out of their exposure to energy with us. But equally for new investors, that they're not buying into an asset class that's risen significantly. And a humbling, an acceptance that there are so many variables that perhaps we don't know what will happen, and an acceptance that we don't know what will happen. Understanding investor and market psychology is probably one of the hardest challenges that most financial advisors face. Most financial advisors occur in their your daily world, trying to understand the next thought process for hundreds of clients and investors that you may have. So what do we do know? We know that the maximum point of financial risk is where the green arrow is. That's the point of the euphoria. That's the time where the investor's walking down the street and they see the billboard that says, if you'd invested with us, you would have made 120, 130, 140%. So a lot of feel-good factor. So everything's risen and done well. Everybody expects that to happen again. And then we've got the opposite. So the maximum point of financial opportunity is where everybody's despondent, and the billboards don't suggest that they've made significant capital. The capital is yet to be made. So that rise of enthusiasm and feel-good factor when everything's done well versus when it's done badly. But it's when it's done badly that perhaps that's the opportunity to have future conversations that suggest we made 120, 130%, and market returns have done well. So the people that make the money are the ones that started their journey, obviously, at the bottom. But you can see there on the right that it is important not to follow the herd. So the word excel, sort of the top half of the chat there that says excel, that then gets converted into sell, and then obviously you get that momentum in the market. And again, on the bottom half of that chart, somebody says goodbye, and that gets, so I'll see you later, that mindset, and then that becomes buy. That gets misinterpreted to buy, the euphoria of the market. So it's absolutely crucial that we think about investment as a long-term journey. So why does it hurt so much? So why is this? Why is the mindset that way? Why can people not see the opportunity? So this was a survey that was done in 1979. It basically says that the pain from a loss is twice that of the pleasure from a gain. I think there's an element here that there's a gain is an expected outcome. So I invested my money, was a mid-risk investor. Congratulations, Andy, it's gone up in value. There was an expectation there that I would make money because I invested in the first place. The pain from a loss being twice as high, it does hurt, and you'll see this day to day that people can have invested £100,000, it's peaked at 130, it falls to 120, and the mindset is, oh, I've made losses. My money's gone down from 130 to 120,000. They don't see that they started at 100 and they're now at 120, so they've made money. They always focus on that loss, that fall in value that's been taken away. So what do we do? What do we do to try and aid you guys as a community? We chart and we take in the data. So as the asset classes change within the portfolios, we try to predict what that basket is going to produce long term. So from a risk profile 1, a BT3 on the left hand side, all the way to somebody who's fairly aggressive. So what does this chart show us? It shows us this, what I would call the dispersion of returns. It shows us that on the left hand side, the upside is limited, but the downside limited. So a lower risk investor, all the way through to the right hand side, where the upside is significantly more, but the downside is more that goes with it. And then the little triangles that you can see across the center, there are predicted long-term outcomes. So that's what our expected long-term returns are going to be. We also plot a stress scenario, so 5th centile. So, you know, in the bottom 5% of all outcomes that could transpire. In the main, we ignore the bottom 10% and we ignore the top 10% to try and get a narrower understanding of what the returns might be. But like I say, we then stress test in that 5th centile. And why do IFAs generally like this? Those of you at the cash flow model, they see this as great in the accumulation phase, where you can start to predict the risk that an investor needs to take, as opposed to the risk that perhaps they want to take, and have a conversation if there's any disjoin, to get some data to feed into the portfolios and then feed that data into the cash flow modeler. So, you know, if I'm a mid-risk investor, so the third bar along, my average return in 2023 looks as though it's going to be 7.5%. Am I likely to meet my goals if my return was 7.5%, or do I need to make 7.5% to achieve my goals? Whichever way around you look at that. And if I need to take more risk because I need 8%, then you can have a conversation about the risk I'm prepared to take and what I need to do. Or if it's the other way around, you know, to meet my goals, can I take less risk than perhaps I'm prepared to take, make it a bit more predictable? So again, reach out to your local AJ Bell BDM or indeed me if you want to chat more about what these forward-looking returns, these slides can do for you. How have we done in terms of performance? It's great to see first, second quartile rankings in there. What we call balanced, so an MPS 3, moderately adventurous, sit in the same category, 40 to 85 sector. So naturally, you'd expect the lower risk portfolio there not to perform quite so well in a rising market because it's limited with the equity content it can take. So that's the bar that says balanced, the third one along. Great to see first and second quartile positions, particularly through 2022. So at AJ Bell, what we try to do is we try to limit downside aware. So for those of you that were around, I'm sure many of you were, 2018 was a year like that. It ended particularly badly, and it's great to see across all risk profiles that we were first quartile. Fast forward through to 2022, you know, it's very, very clear in everybody's minds now as to what went on. And again, first quartile, so we managed that downside risk. I guess if the title was to try and keep more of what you make, that's probably what we stand for. As we promote the client money, we're trying to keep hold of what we make. So some great numbers across a long period of time. So in summary, global economy is you know, it's in for significant change, and we really need to be careful how we navigate that change. The next 12 to 18 months look highly challenging. You know, we're going to see some uncertainties. There are some things that are going to be hard to predict. As I mentioned before, it's really important to get investors in the mindset to think longer term, think about those long-term return predictions, and not be buffeted by short-term noise that's in the news. And you hear it a lot, but diversification comes more to the fore in times of stress. So we really need to make sure these portfolios are well diversified and control the things that you can control. So low cost with a proven process that's limited downside risk time since these portfolios were launched really is striking a chord with financial advisory. Thanks very much. Enjoy the rest of the modules.
And that takes us to our coffee break. So grab a refill and we'll be back in 5 minutes with the second 2 sessions. Thank you. Welcome back. Next up is our penultimate speaker, and she's no stranger to our monthly webinars and in-person events. Our senior technical consultant, Lisa Webster, has joined our Connect lineup and is digging into the future of pensions policy. Following the shock budget announcement of the removal of the pensions lifetime allowance, Shadow Chancellor Rachel Reeves immediately stood up and said that Labour would reverse this policy. Lisa will take a look at what this might mean for pensions should Labour get in the next election, plus a wider view of tax plans for a potential Labour government. She'll also examine some of the more recent announcements from our current Pensions Minister, Laura Trott, and a few of the topical bits and pieces from DWP. Over to you, Lisa.
So hello and welcome to this presentation on the future of pensions policy. So pensions policy, a bit of crystal ball time now. I do have a confession to make. I don't have a crystal ball sat here on my desk with me now as I'm talking to you or any other time. It's a little bit different than sort of subject area that I normally talk about. But sort of looking ahead, the idea of this really is to sort of gather sort of bits of information that we do have in terms of what the current government and a potential future government's thinking is in terms of pension policy. So looking at sort of the announcements that we've had a few leaks, bits of rumours and bits and pieces, and looking at what we think might happen going forward. There's a few bits that we know are going to happen, a few bits that we think could happen, and then looking at the options of the what could and couldn't, and a few different scenarios basically. So that's the idea of the session really today. So I'm going to start off by looking at the lifetime allowance changes and what might happen with that. So we just heard from Josh, and he's talked about what has happened that we know has happened that came out of the spring budget announcements. So I'm not going to talk about that. I'm looking forward really about what's going to happen in relation to the lifetime allowance going forward, because of course as soon as we had the spring budget announcements, almost straight away Labour stood up and said they would reverse them. So we hadn't even had the celebratory champagne, I think, from the surprise announcement in the budget that we weren't going to have to do LTA calculations anymore and A75 tests and all those awful things. Then it was like, yeah, oh dear, maybe we do still have to worry about this. We shall see. So they were been very vocal in saying that they will reverse this, how they call it, tax cut for the rich if they win the next election. There's loads of headlines around this about them pledging to reverse the plan to abolish the lifetime allowance. And that has caused a lot of problems, I think. It's certainly a thing we get asked about the most. Since the budget, we get lots of questions from advisors, paraplanners, advisor firms about not just what the changes are, but what it means and what might happen if Labour, get into power, what will they do? And people are worried about making decisions based on, what the situation is now, because what might happen if it gets reversed in the future? What are the implications of that? Leaves pension tax rules in a complete mess and makes your jobs very difficult as well. So I'm really going to start by looking, what Labour have said, what they've not said, and what they could do. So in terms of that initial announcement that they made, which was very much a reaction, I think, to the budget announcement about getting rid of the LTA, they haven't really said an awful lot, is the honest truth. I could be generous and sort of point out the fact that we have temporary measures in place this year now, which we know what the rules are this year, and this year's finance bill has got royal assent now, so that's all confirmed and settled and not going to change. But we don't know what the rules are for next year, what they're going to be from April 24, which is, of course, is when the lifetime allowance is meant to be removed completely. Rather, at the moment, it's just the lifetime allowance charge. Sorry. So it could be generous to say, well, they haven't told us how they're going to put it back because nobody actually know how it's being removed yet. So that could be one view. And what they have done is, when this year's finance bill was going through Parliament, is they did put forward some amendments. And this is one of them that I've got on screen now, a bit about a review of alternatives to the abolition of the lifetime allowance charge. So this is in this year's finance, what is now an act, was a finance bill, obviously, when they put it through. So they were basically saying that they wanted to be a review about getting rid of the lifetime allowance charge, recommendations arising from that review, and they wanted a review to make recommendations on alternative approaches that would only benefit NHS doctors. So this is clearly, they've put this in there so it would get discussed. It had to be discussed in Parliament, but it didn't go anywhere. Conservative government have a majority at the moment. This is not in the Finance Act, because I say it is finalised now. It got royal assent on the 11th of July. It's not in there. This is something they put in there. It got thrown out, unsurprisingly, but it shows their intent. However, I will balance this out, because there were some in the industry press stories around this. This clause had been added, and obviously, showing Labour intent. But it wasn't like the only thing they put in there. The same Labour MPs who put these clauses forward always put forward all these other clauses as well, which was really sort of relating to pretty much all the changes that came out of the budget. Because so the ones I've listed on the slide there: business taxes, energy profits, levy allowances, etc. They're the ones and they were very similar clauses that were put in about having a review within 6 months and look at alternatives. They were pretty much on the same basis for all of these. They were put forward by sort of shadow Treasury MPs. There were also a whole load of other amendments in other areas put through by different MPs as well, Labour MPs. So there was lots in there. So what I'm saying is, obviously, yes, it is on Labour's radar, but it's not necessarily meaning it's their #1 priority, because there's lots of other things that were in there as well. It's not just about the lifetime allowance, and I don't necessarily think it's going to be the very first thing, #1 on Labour's priority list, should, and it is a big should, if, should they win the next election, get in. They've got other concerns. I mean, one of them on there, the non-dom status thing, that's much higher up their list, I think. I think that's a really big one that they're keen on. It's about shortening the period before you become domiciled. That's a big target for them as well. Okay, so it's on there. They could potentially bring it back. Obviously, that's what they say they're going to do. It was interesting. I was at a conference a couple of weeks ago, and just as a delegate, and the question was asked in the room, how many people think if Labour get in, they'll bring back the lifetime allowance? And there's probably only about half the people in the room, probably maybe slightly less than half of the people in the room who thought they actually would. So make what you like of that. So I wouldn't say it's a certainty. If they do bring it back, there's nowhere where they have said at what level they would bring it back in. I think a lot of the time, sort of the questions I'm getting, and people are worried about it, and advising client, particularly if they make big contributions now, because they can do, the annual allowances have all gone up, and carry forward for people who previously had protections, things like that. If they put in a lot more now, are they going to get penalised in the future because the lifetime allowance is going to be back in at its current level? And we don't know that. They've said they'll bring it back in. Doesn't mean they'll bring it back in at the 1,073,100. They could reintroduce it at the level it was originally brought in, because let's not forget, it was a Labour government back in 2006 when the lifetime allowance was first introduced. It was £1.5 million. The legislation for A-Day was all contained in Finance Act 2004. And in Finance Act 2004, it said the lifetime allowance was introduced at 1.5 million, and over the next 5 years, it was going to go up to 1.8 million, which of course it did. It also said in that legislation that the lifetime allowance could never go down, which of course we all know what happened there. Obviously, legislation can be rewritten. But my point is that, when it was introduced, a Labour government introduced the lifetime allowance, or in power when the lifetime allowance came in, and when they were in charge, it was introduced at 1.5 million, and it was going up to 1.8 million, and within legislation it couldn't go down. So I wouldn't necessarily assume that if it does come back, it's going to come back at 1,073,100 and stay there. That's not necessarily, the picture at all. The short answer is we don't know if they did bring it back, at what level it would be. There is this idea of whether they do the carve out for the doctors, because they have mentioned that a couple of times in a few places that is their preferred option. If they're looking at a particular scheme, would they do something along the lines of the judicial scheme, where it's taken outside, pension schemes, it's taken outside of the lifetime allowance. Of course, there's somebody fairly senior in the Labour Party who would know about the judicial scheme. So, that is a possibility. Obviously, they have been making noises in that direction. I think a lot of the time people, what I hear, is there's concerns about could they bring it back in? If Labour get in, could they bring back the lifetime allowance and then charge people for people who have taken benefits either this year where there's no lifetime allowance charge, or next year when there is, well, there shouldn't be any lifetime allowance. We're told that the lifetime allowance is going to be removed completely. Are they going to be, if Labour get in, are they going to come back and hit these people with a tax charge? And I think the answer, I'm reasonably confident as I can be, without having insider information or anything like that. I think it's very unlikely they're going to do that, because there are human rights laws about retrospective charges. You can only advise, based on the rules are as they are now. You can't, if some buts, well, what happened if Labour come in? They might not win the next election. I know they're, clearly ahead in the polls at the moment, but, if we're looking at probably end of next year before we have an election, a lot can change in that time. We all know that a week can be a long time in politics, let alone 18 months or so before we have an election. So they're not guaranteed to get in, and then it depends what the world looks like at that point. Is this going to be top of their list, and all these things. But yeah, even if they came back in, I don't see how they could possibly penalise people for doing stuff within the rules. You just can't do that. There's human rights, etc., on that. I just don't think that's going to happen. The other thing to remember, of course, is whenever we've had changes to lifetime allowance in the past, as in when it was introduced or any times when it's been cut, we've always had protection for those people. So people aren't worse off, and that is because of the human rights issue. You can't make people worse off. So back in 2006, as I mentioned, it was a Labour government at the time. When it first came along, we had enhanced protection and primary protection. We then had cuts under the coalition in 2012 and 2014, and then the Conservatives in 2016. So whatever colour your government is, whenever there's been a reduction, the introduction or a reduction in the lifetime allowance, there's always been protection in place for those that have built up benefits under a previous set of rules, and on that basis. So I don't see how it would be any different. The LTA gets abolished next year. If it does get reintroduced, why would we think there would be protection? If there's always been in the past. For those of you that are old enough to remember, pre-A-Day, 87 rules, 87, 89, post-89 members, all the set of different regimes that we had in the past. It goes back. The same applies back then. Basically, you got to keep benefits on the basis that you'd built them up, and then so how looking back a really long way into history, there's always been protection in place. I've also put in here 2025 question mark 2026 in terms of if the LTA was to be reintroduced. If Labour get in, I would be very surprised if it came in by 2025, because if we're looking at an election, probably end of 24 is most likely, has to be by January 25. It would be a very short period of time for them to bring it in for April 25. Not completely impossible, but is it number one on the list, or are they going to be worried about doing other things first? And I think the answer is yes, they have other priorities. It's not necessarily number one, the first thing they've got to do when they come into power. Even if even if it goes in their manifesto and it's a policy promise, whatever, doesn't mean they have to do it by 2025. I would have thought 2026 at the earliest would be more realistic. So you'd have a bit more time on that, but we'll see. What else could happen with Labour? Well, Rachel Reeves, so the Shadow Chancellor, has said, this was on I think it was a Radio 4 interview she did, she had no plans to be a big tax-raising Chancellor. I think we have quite a tax-raising Chancellor at the moment, so she doesn't need to, I think. Interestingly, she also said they had no plans to increase capital gains tax. I think that is quite an interesting one, because obviously there's been a few reports and recommendations about equalising CGT with income tax, so it looks like that's not on the cards for them. Also interestingly, no plans to cut tax break for pension contributions. So in the budget this year, we had the annual allowances going up for pensions, tapered MPAA and the main annual allowance, and that would actually be quite an easy target, I would have thought, to reduce those allowances. Much less controversial, no retrospective issues in the same way, that'd be much easier. So maybe slightly surprising that they've said that. She's made that statement. But yeah, I think they have other priorities. And I said the non-dom status, as I mentioned already, I think that's a big one. The other ones which might impact your clients will be the private school tax breaks. They want to end the private school tax breaks. That's quite a big one for Labour, and also private equity tax breaks as well, which again, these things I think are probably higher up their list of priorities. Labour list leaked this document onto their website. You can go look it up if you want to read it all in detail. But yeah, the draft policy platform that could form the next Labour manifesto, and on this, there were these 6 areas, which are the areas of focus for Labour. Their priorities, coming under these different titles. There's nothing there that's really obviously pensions, but I did do a search on the document for pension in there, and found that there were 4 mentions of pension in the document. First one was about mine workers pension schemes, so I'm not going to go into detail on that one. The second one was about the tax treatment of doctors' pensions, discourage senior clinicians from continuing in the workforce, and to introduce a targeted scheme for senior doctors across the UK to address these issues. It does sound to me like that was maybe drafted before the budget, because it doesn't sort of mention that that's been resolved by how the Conservatives have dealt with it. But it does, sort of show their plan that, if they did reintroduce a lifetime allowance, they probably would do something separate for doctors. Also on here, we have this intent to ensure that older people have security in retirement and implement a strategy for ageing well, including those approaching pension age. So I think on there, you could read into that a bit about sort of state pension, a bit about auto enrolment as well. And then the last point is definitely about auto enrolment, which is talking about building further partnerships between employers and workers based on a shared responsibility to make pension contributions and plan for retirement, build on the success of the auto enrolment scheme brought in by the last Labour government. So they're taking all the credit on that one. So look at those a little bit more. First of all, looking at state pension, there were reports out a couple of weeks ago in the papers that, clearly stating that both Labour and Tories have pledged to protect the triple lock. So they are politically, cross-party support for the triple lock, it would appear. So it looks as though whoever's going to be in power, the triple lock is here to stay. At least, if it's going to go in the next manifesto for both governments, at least for the next parliament, whichever way that goes. The other bit on state pension, of course, that we've got is the state pension age review. So we had the review published back in March. So we know we've got the rise to age 67 happening between 2026 and 2028. We know that's happening. It's what we're looking at now is like further state pension ages and when it goes up. So at the moment, it is sort of in their draft that it's going to go up in the 40s, 2040s to go up to pension age 68. But so this is a review as to whether that's still appropriate or not. So the Conservatives, when this review came out, basically they kicked the can down the road and passed it on to the next government. So what they have said that there will be a review within 2 years of the next parliament to reconsider the next age. So say 67 is given, it's the next one is going to 68. So we do have to give 10 years notice. The government has to give 10 years notice of a change to state pension age. So, you know, say at the moment that's planned for, you know, in the 2040s now. So even if after the next, you know, election, you know, we have a new government in 24, 25, within 2 years, so by 26, 27, they would have to do the review. But it's got to be at least 10 years after that, before at the very earliest that it could happen. So it's going to be late 2030s at earliest if they bring it forward. You know, that's the earliest they could bring it forward to. But yeah, there is this potential, you know, when it's looked at as to whether to bring it forward on that. Also linking that into, you know, not just state pensions, because we have the normal minimum pension age, which is meant to be linked, so it's 10 years below state pension age. So in 2028, you know, we have the rise when state pension reaches age 67, the normal minimum pension age is going to go to 57. So we know that's happening. So obviously if state pension change, then there'll be a knock-on impact as well for normal minimum pension age. So another thing that's a little bit further down the line, but you know, on the long distance horizon. Auto enrolment then is the next one we've got on there, which is was touched on. Obviously Labour in favour of expanding, you know, continuing the success, I think it said, of auto enrolment. So at the moment we have a bill going through Parliament on the extension of automatic enrolment. This was started in the House of Lords. It has been through the House of Commons already. It's back in the House of Lords. I know it got debated on, I think it was like the 14th of July. By the time you're watching this, it might have been on to the next stage. Basically, this bill has cross-party support, so it you know, doesn't matter who wins the election or whatever. This is going to happen pretty much. So this is about extending auto enrolment, as it suggests the title. So it means that it'll start from age 18. So anybody that's an employee, but it'll start from age 18 rather than age 22. And the contributions will be from first pound earned. So you'll still have this minimum level. You have to be earning £10,000 before it kicks in. But if an employer has employees age 18 or over who are earning at least £10,000 a year, then they will have to make auto enrolment contributions for them, and it will be from first pound earned, not from the moment it's on banded earnings. It's above 6,000 and something, I can't remember the exact figure, that it starts on, whereas it'll start from zero on that. So this is the primary legislation to put it through. There will then be further consultation on this, and so to put the regulations and put things in place in practice. So we are expecting this will go straight through. We're expecting the consultation on this in the autumn. In practice, it's probably going to be at least 2, probably 3 years before this actually comes into force. So, you know, it's happening, but it's just a little bit way down the line. And I think it is still, it's the next stage in auto enrolment. It's by no means the end point. There's still, you know, general view in the industry, and I'm sure that the 8% isn't high enough. It's not a big enough percentage of earnings. So, you know, but once this is expanded, then the next stage might be to look at, you know, raising the level of contributions, whether that's, you know, making it 10%, whereby the employer puts in the same as the employee, so 5% each. But yeah, we'll see on that one. Next on my list is pensions dashboard. When I did this one live, I did sort of ask around the room, sort of, you know, who thinks pensions dashboard is actually going to happen, and there's probably not too many people, I think. We'll see. So pensions dashboard, you know, was all, you know, we were preparing for a deadline of next month of August 23, where we had to connect to the dashboard, and then we had the announcement a couple of months ago. It was all being put on hold, and now we have confirmation of the new deadline. And so the deadline is the hard deadline, if you like, the backstop for pensions dashboard for all schemes to connect to the dashboard is October 2026. So from us connecting on August 23, that's quite a big pushback. The pensions minister has said, that he's still going ahead. That is a hard, it's the backstop. They would hope the schemes will still connect before then, but obviously the scheme has problems, hence why it's been put back. She's hopeful that schemes will connect beforehand and the dashboards could go live before then, just maybe not with everybody on it. But we'll wait and see. And I think, our providers are really going to, push ahead and try and connect earlier if they don't have to. We've got an awful lot of other things going on at the moment as well to deal with. And whether it's really going to happen, time will tell on that one. There's also other things going on which might mean it is of less importance, should I say. But more on that in just a second. But yeah, it'll be interesting to see what happens with the pension dashboard, but it's certainly been pushed back significantly on that one. Next up, I've got some bits and pieces from the DWP, what's been going on. And actually, when I put these slides together, these were the things that we were waiting for, but they have come out now. So yeah, we had a number of papers come out on the 11th of July. First one was on small pot consolidation. So we'd had the call for evidence on this earlier. I mean, small pots is something that's gone back and forth over the years. Pot full of members, various different ideas out there. But what we have now is a formal consultation. So we had the call for evidence earlier, we now have a formal consultation on the proposed way forward for small pots. And the preferred approach of this is about automated consolidation. So what they're saying is that there will be a number of authorised multi-consolidators. So not just one, but not lots either, maybe like 4 or 5 or something, big authorised consolidator schemes, whereby small pots can be consolidated into them. The consultation includes a definition of what we call a small pot that would be included in this process. The proposal is for a pot size of £1,000. So a small pot would be if it was a fund of £1,000 or less, and it would be where there had been no contributions going into it for at least 12 months. Now, I think there is quite a view that that is too low a level. The suggestion, there's various levels suggested, up to I think it's about £20,000 that could be considered a small pot. I think the way they're looking at it, to be fair, in the consultation, is that it would be reviewed, would be subject to statutory review, the size of the small pot. But I think the idea of doing £1,000 is that you get the system up and running and deal with those first, and then once it's all going, you could then expand it to larger pots, which I think would be necessary to be worthwhile, really, especially when you think of it in relation to, I've just talked about the auto enrolment expansion. If you've got 18-year-olds and it's from first pound, and you could quite easily have a number of pots, £1,100, £1,500, £2,000, changing jobs, to relatively, starting out in your working life, it's probably more common to change jobs more frequently and get more small pots, but they could still be over 1,000. Anyway, so the consultation on that is open. In terms of the system for how it would work, is they did look at a central register, but the preferred approach is that you would have a clearing house, which will need to be created, so that the provider who has got a small pot from a member less than £1,000, they haven't paid in for 12 months, they would go to this clearing house and sort of basically ask them, what they should do with this small pot, and the clearing house would look and see if that member had any small pots, any funds with any of the multi-consolidators, and if they did, then make sure they go to the same one, and if not, it would just be like a carousel system, and they'd pick the next one off the carousel and they say send it there, and then the current pension provider would send it directly to that consolidator. So the clearing house doesn't actually handle the money, is the proposal, but it's just an exchange of information on it like that. There is an intention to establish a delivery group an industry delivery group later on this year to develop the auto consolidation transfer process and sort of see how that would work. Next one on there is value for money. So this is the joint consultation between the TPR and the FCA on the new value for money framework for DC schemes. This is one that it's starting off as workplace pensions, but the FCA have already said they will be expanding this in the future to personal pensions as well. So this is like the first stage of it. So this is where they're talking about having a traffic light system, red, amber, green, where schemes are assessed value for money. So it's not just all about price, obviously that is a factor, but it's on, service, performance, communications as well. Possibility there'll be league tables that come out of that, which will be for advisors and employers use rather than for the actual members to rate the schemes. There'll be more sort of requirements if schemes aren't performing to report that to the employers. So there's a few bits and pieces around that. Multi-employer CDC schemes, we've got new consultation out on that. So we have the post office scheme up and running now on CDC. So this is about expanding it out to multi-employer schemes, whole life. And there's a consultation on this expected in the autumn. We have the May legislation in place, so there's a bit more coming on that. Illiquid assets, I'll come on to a little bit more on that in just a moment. Following on from the small pot consolidation, our current pension minister, Laura Trott there, is very keen on this lifetime pension idea. So, and she actually, spoke about this before the small pots paper came out, but there is a bit about this in the introduction to the small pots paper as well. So the small pots, obviously that deals with, auto consolidation, but it doesn't stop the problem of more small pots still being created. So the idea of a lifetime pension is that the employee would get to choose their pension, and when they change jobs, their new employer would basically pay into that pension. So you have a pension, in Australia they call it stapling. Sounds painful, but yeah, you have your pension stapled to you and you take it with you wherever you go, and then your employer pays your contributions into that scheme. Now, of course, an employer, there's lots of practical issues with an employer paying to hundreds of different pension schemes, which is why you'd have to have a clearing house. So in this case, which is like a stage on from the small pots things, is the clearing house would handle money because the employer would pay the contribution to them, and then the clearing house would pay it to the provider of the member's choice. And yeah, you keep your pension with you, so that would stop some more small pots building up, is the general idea on that. This is a bit further down the line. The small pots consultation, is up, and so they've got working groups that are going to be happening in the autumn. That's further down the road. This is a bit, I think they'll get that sorted, and then the next stage might be to do something along these lines. Last little bits I'm going to talk about Mansion House speech. So we had the Mansion House speech on the 10th of July, and following that, the next morning, we had a lot of papers that came out. Some of it was the DWP stuff I've already talked about. We also had a few other bits and pieces from Treasury as well. There was a lot of consultations that came out of this. The gist of the Mansion House speech and the Mansion House compact that came out of it is, so this is the Chancellor's speech to the City. The big picture thing about what came out of all of this is that when it comes to pensions, they want bigger pension funds. So there's a lot of consolidation in there. They want pension funds that are better run. So like things like the value for money comes under that category. There's also, we've had consultation papers out on trusteeship, raising the standards of trusteeship. And they want pension funds to invest in the UK economy, invest for growth in the UK. So there's a whole raft of consultations and papers that came out of it. But the vast majority of them you can put into one or multiple of those themes. So the Mansion House Compact, which was the big headline announcement, is about large DC pensions, which was like, I think it was Aviva, Scottish Widows, L&G, Aegon Phoenix, Nest, Smart Pension, M&G and Mercer, all together. have come to an agreement with the Chancellor, with the government, that they will allocate at least 5% of their default funds to unlisted equities by 2030. So this is about locking growth, which I think the figure was up to £50 billion of investment into high growth companies by 2030. That is the idea. So it's about accessing the potential of DC pensions. I think the Chancellor, the government have been looking around the world at other pension systems, and particularly Australia super funds, and Canada, thinking of how they can access money that's locked up in pensions to boost the UK economy. From a political point of view, obviously this is the Conservative Chancellor who's doing this. Labour are big on this as well, though. So the announcement that came out to say, and the speech and the compact that's followed, it's a target that those pension schemes have agreed that they're going to try and meet, to have, say, 5% of the default in the unlisted equities. Labour would go further. Labour saying they would mandate it to make it compulsory. So whichever government we have, in the future, that's the direction of travel. It's about making pension schemes invest more in growth in the UK economy on that. Some of the other bits and pieces that came out from Mansion House as well is about introducing a permanent super fund regulatory regime, super DB schemes. There was DB call for evidence, because the DWP are looking at how DB schemes can increase the amount invested in what they call productive asset classes. So that's, again, UK private equities, startups and infrastructure. Productive finance is another term that you might hear in relation to that. One other piece, which is probably not so much coming under that theme, but also came out with the Mansion House announcements, is consultation on helping savers understand their pension choices. And this is a proposal to make all defined contribution pension schemes offer drawdown. So that's including Nest, everybody, so that when people, particularly workplace pensions, when they reach retirement age, that they have the information, and it's not just, they have to go out by themselves, if you like, that there will be a default option to have drawdown. Now, if those pension schemes themselves don't want to offer drawdown, then they could partner with another firm. So there would always be a default option. So there's a consultation out on that at the moment. Last little thing I've got coming up, which actually this wasn't part of Mansion House, but it's very much on the same theme, but from the FCA, actually came out a couple of weeks earlier, is about broadening retail and pensions access to the long-term asset fund. You may have seen something about this. So this is about the reclassification of long-term asset funds, so it's available to mass market. It'd be restricted mass market, but it makes it more available to people that they could use it in SIPs and self-select pensions, I think is how they term it, to invest in the long-term asset fund. And there's exposure limits on that. So yeah, that's what's that's out there. That is a policy statement that is coming into force. Part of this paper is also a consultation section on it, which is about access to the FSCS in relation to these funds. So I don't know what so you will have your own views on this. I think from our point of view, AJ Bell, we still think this is it's a higher risk, less liquid investment for for customers. So yes, it might be good for the UK economy, but is it good for the individual investor? Is it appropriate still? It's not something we're planning on offering, I think is our view, but you may find there's other providers out there who take a different view, and you may be entitled, obviously you're entitled to a different view as well. No issue with that. Okay, just to finish off with them, my crystal ball gaze is just to recap, what do we know, what do we not know, what do we know going forward? We know that there's no lifetime allowance charged this year. We know people can pay more into pensions now because the annual allowance has gone up. We know the LTA will be removed next year. There are plans afoot on that one. We have working groups with HMRC about what that's going to look like. They haven't released the details on that as yet. The legislation should come out in draft form for consultation. We should be able to see in advance, but we don't know what it is just yet. there will have to be some checks still regarding PCLS payments, because there'll be protection of, in relation to lump sums. We know pension dashboards isn't happening anytime soon. State pension age review, that has to happen, that will be coming. And triple lock is here to stay, regardless of, you know, what colour the next government is. What we don't know, lots of things I could put on here, we could go on forever, but just to emphasise the point, you know, if Labour will win the next election, we don't know. A lot of the conversations I've had with advisors, it's almost like, you know, when Labour get in, what will they do? What will it look like? You know, rather than an if. You know, if they will definitely reinstate the lifetime allowance, if they do bring it back, you know, what's it going to look like? So I don't necessarily think it's definitely going to be the same level as it is now. Are they going to do a carve out for doctors? Possibly, obviously, if they bring the LTA back. If the pension dashboards will ever happen. The reason I'm sort of questioning that a bit more is if the small pots work is successful, and if you then follow that up and had a lifetime pension as well, it kind of reduces the need for a dashboard. You know, if we have all small pots are consolidated, then it'd be quite easy to find, wouldn't they? You know, so we'll see where that one goes. And then the last bit on there, state pension age increase. We know when it's going to 67. We don't know when it's going to 68 or anything beyond that. So that is all from me. Quick roundup. I hope that has been useful, but thank you very much for watching.
Thanks, Lisa. Again, any questions, drop them into the chat and Lisa will get back with answers to you after the session. Now on to our final speaker, our special guest, Callum Dubois. With his talk, Challenge Yourself, it's the only path which leads to growth. Callum will explain how many valuable life lessons cement the notion that some go through tough times to grow and flourish. This heartwarming close to our morning will have you seeking your own opportunities. As Callum will explain, they don't come to those who sit and wait. Callum, over to you.
Hello everyone from AJ Bell. Thank you very much for listening to a small part of my story. My name is Callum Dubois and I am a Paralympian from a town in Scotland called Prestwick, which is on the Ayrshire coast. I'm just going to tell you a little bit about my story and how I came into the position I am today. I'm a GB Paranordic skier, a GB paracyclist, a public speaker, and I'm also a chef. So this is just a little bit about my story and how I came into the position that I am today. So when I left school, I didn't really know what I wanted to do or what I wanted to be. So I went to college. I wasn't really enjoying my college course. So I decided that I would get a job in a kitchen, and that sort of just really snowballed. And I was working really long hours. I was working in the Isle of Skye, and then ultimately I came back down to Ayrshire and I started working at Tunbury on the Tunbury coast. And as I said, I was working really long hours, not really being good to myself. And on a motorbike one day, I made the really bad decision to overtake a car, and I didn't see a car coming head on, which is this car in the image in the centre there. Fortunately, the driver of the car wasn't injured. I high-sided, which means I lost control and then flipped and come off my bike and landed on my feet, and then my bike slid up the road and then went underneath the car. Now when I've landed on the road, that sent a shockwave through my body, breaking multiple bones. And at the roadside, the air ambulance was called, and the doctors at the roadside put me in a coma, and I was airlifted to Elizabeth in Glasgow. And when I was put me through the CT scanner when I got to the hospital, I realised all my injuries. So my injuries were my left femur, I broke my right rib, I punctured a lung, my intestines were missed, and I ruptured my diaphragm. It was a a pretty serious accident, and I'm very fortunate to be alive, and it's only due to the motorcycle leathers that I was wearing that I am still here, and obviously the amazing doctors within the NHS. So once they sort of found my injuries, I'd had my scan, they then rushed me into emergency surgery. The emergency surgery was to fix my diaphragm, because ultimately that would have killed me first, and then I had to look after my lung and sort of put my intestines back to where they should be. And within, I remained in my coma, but a week later they just couldn't save my left leg. And my left leg, when I broke it, it's basically sort of broken and just snapped the bone in two. And when that happened, it cut one of my arteries in my left leg. Now they sort of stabilised it, fitted an external fixator, which is just the picture to the left of the crash, and they just couldn't save it. It started to slowly die and sort of went necrotic, and unfortunately they had to amputate it whilst I was still in my coma. My mum and dad had to sign the paper and say, yeah, you can amputate his leg. So I remained in the coma for a month and woke up out of my coma and was just absolutely shocked. I didn't really know what to think. When I first woke up from my coma, this sort of shows like the true power of the brain. I woke up and had a blanket over me, but my brain still thought that I had my motorcycle boots on. I believe sort of the last thing I remember seeing at the roadside before I went under was my motorcycle boots, motorcycle leathers. And I was just shouting at the nurses to come and cut them off. And slowly as I came round, it went from being on both legs just to my left leg. And I was still shouting at nurses just to get a pair of scissors and cut my motorcycle leathers and motorcycle boots off. And it wasn't until my dad came into the hospital and he just said to me, he was like, look, Callum, you don't have a leg, and there's nothing on you. But I was convinced that there was some motorcycle leathers. I still remember to the day he got the tottiest little pair of scissors and cut along where my leg used to be, and it just gave me instant relief. That's just sort of my brain just can't process having that one leg. And there's a thing called phantom limb pain that a lot of amputees get. And phantom limb pain is basically there's a disconnect from your brain to your nerves that go to your leg, and your brain can't quite piece it together. So I almost sort of feel like I've still got a leg, but obviously I don't. So that just sort of shows the power of the human brain. So after feeling sorry for myself when I woke up, maybe for 2 or 3 days, I thought, well, my leg's not going to grow back. It's not going to come back. So I've just got to get on with it. I've got to get on with my life. And for me, I had one goal in mind after leaving the hospital, and that was to then become a Paralympian. So I spent another month in hospital, and then it was time to learn to walk again. And this is sort of when my recovery journey really started from. So you go to a place called Westmark, which is the leading prosthetic centre in Scotland, which is just below my recovery on the screen. So this is my first leg. It's pretty basic. It's just got a knee joint and just a straight bar and a solid foot, and it's held onto your waist with a big strap. And the sort of pink bit is custom to me. That's called your socket, and that's fitted to my stump, my residual limb. And you start off walking in between 2 parallel bars, just purely for safety. You've got something to hold on to, something to grab if you feel like you're going to fall. And then as you start to get a little more confident, you can start to bend your leg and also work your way up to walking sticks. So 2 walking sticks, 1 walking stick, and then sort of no walking sticks, which I am today. So my first leg was pretty basic, and then just purely through my hard work, I worked my way up to get a microprocessor leg, which doesn't read my brain, but it just helps me to walk. It sort of learns how I like to walk. And can cycle with it, you can walk up and down stairs. It is an amazing piece of kit, and it costs about £30,000 to £40,000, and I don't know how much money's been spent on prosthetics for me in the past 6 years. So yeah, it's an expensive game. So for me, my recovery journey was just goal setting. I had to keep setting myself goals, and obviously the goals were ultimately learning to walk without any aids, just on my own. And that was sort of essential, and I've carried this forward into my sporting career as well, is goal setting, because goal setting for me is just the ultimate. You can't get any better, because it gives you the little wins when you reach a smaller goal, and ultimately when you reach that big goal, it means so much more, just because you know where you've came from. So once I'd learned to walk, I wanted to go and try sports. And luckily for me, at the prosthetic centre, I met a Paralympian called Scott, who gave me the opportunity to go Paranordic skiing. So the picture in the middle is me on snow in Norway, and then up the top opposite corner to my recovery is me in a place called Livigno in Italy, and we were roller skiing, which is a summer means of skiing. So Paranordic skiing is like cross country and biathlon, so it's a little bit like cross country running, except we use our arms and push ourselves along the snow. And because I do have an impairment, I sit down to ski, which you can see in the pictures. So we have 2 poles, a rig, and either a mountain skateboard if it's summer, or just 2 thin skis, and off you go. You can ski and race, and I absolutely love it, and fell in love with that. So my first camp was in Germany in 2018, and as soon as I got on snow, I set the goal of getting to the Paralympics. That's how determined I was to get to the Paralympics. And then below that is me cycling, again in Livigno. I cycle fully single leg. I just find that it's so much easier. If I do cycle with a prosthetic, it generally falls off. So I just like to cycle single leg. It's just easier for me. So the getting to the Paralympics, obviously in 2018 it was in Pyeongchang, and in 2022 it was Beijing. So that's the goal I set, and I just got to work, set the little goals throughout the 4-year cycle of getting to the Paralympics, just to give myself little wins. So if I reach a number in the gym, or on the ski erg, or on my board, it just gives you that little incentive just to keep going, to keep training as hard as you can. So ultimately this then led me to get to the Paralympics, which for me was just an absolute miracle. I got there. About 6 months before the Paralympics, I was involved in a second bike accident. This time was on my push bike. This time wasn't my fault. Someone pulled out in front of me. I come off my bike and tore my tricep tendon. Now your tricep tendon is pretty essential for cross-country skiing, for us anyway, because we just use our arms to ski along. So to even get to the Paralympics for me was just incredible. It was the most incredible experience I've ever had in my life. I've never seen so many disabled people in one place, but it's just awe-inspiring. And even me living with a disability, kind of meeting other people with disabilities, just helps to show me that anything is possible, and you can keep going in life and live an amazing life. For me, the best thing that ever happened to me was my accident, because I would never have been to a Paralympics or got this opportunity to do sport to the level I'm doing. So I almost need to pinch myself sometimes. So the picture in the middle, with me skiing, and that was the venue. So we were at the National Biathlon Centre, because obviously we do cross country and biathlon. So biathlon is cross country skiing, but with the shooting element as well. So we have 5 targets, which are the size of a 5-pence piece. that are 10 meters away, and we use iron sights to then shoot the targets. And for every target that we miss, we have a 100-meter penalty loop, or a 1 minute time penalty added on to our time at the end of the race. So it's a real incentive to shoot well and to take your time, follow the process, and not rush it. Because obviously there's consequences to our actions. So my race distances at Beijing were 1 kilometre, 7.5 kilometres, 12.5 kilometres, and 20 kilometres. So there's quite a broad range of races. So we need to be prepared for a lot. So races can last from 4 minutes all the way up to an hour and 10 minutes. So as a Paralympic skier, they say it is the hardest sport there is, just because the stress in your body is unbelievable. But again, all the pain and sweat and tears and everything to get to the Olympics was totally worth it. Up in the top corner, that's me with one of the mascots in the Paralympic Village, and the picture below that is also in the Paralympic Village. It was just absolutely stunning. You might notice there's not much snow. So at Beijing, all the snow was trucked in and made, it was all artificial snow. And the best way to sort of describe the snow was like mashed potato. It was like you were skiing through treacle. It was horrible conditions, but again, the Chinese put on such an amazing Paralympics. And within the Paralympic Village, you have your accommodation, you have everything you could need there for you in one place, and there's people running about after you. There's little taxi services to take you up and down to the food hall. There's buses to the actual venue. It's all there for us. It's insane. So there's like vending machines all dotted round that you could just have. You had a little tab, you just press up against it, and you could have whatever you want for free. The food hall was 24/7, and again, you could have whatever you want, all for free, all catered for you. There was Beijing Post. There was like a big arcade in there. There was gyms, a medical centre. Honestly, like you wouldn't even think you were there to do sport. Like it was just insane. And again, the venue that we were skiing at was unbelievable. The views of the ski jump, and it was in the middle of a desert, so there was like snow in some bits, and then it was just like brown. So towards the end of the games, the snow got covered in loads of dust. So I think at the end of it, we ruined about 10 grand worth of skis. But again, that's the price of the Paralympics. Unfortunately, it's not a cheap sport. So for me to represent Great Britain at the pinnacle of sport was just unbelievable, and the experience for me was just amazing. I can't put it into words how much it meant to me to get there and realise that goal that I'd set, and just follow through something that I put up there that was a pretty big goal. And then after the Paralympics, unfortunately, UK sport just didn't think that Nordic skiing in the UK was investable. Although we went from 1 athlete in Pyeongchang to 5 athletes in Beijing, they just didn't see it as investable. So unfortunately, my funding got cut after the Paralympics, and it was going to cost me about 40 grand a year to ski, and I just don't have that kind of money. So unfortunately, I had to retire from skiing, but I didn't retire from sport. I done sports all through school, stopped to become a chef, and then started sports again, and I realised how much I missed it. So I looked for some more opportunities, and luckily for me, I got the opportunity to go and get a trial with British Cycling on their paracycling squad. I thankfully got onto the talent squad back in January of this year, and then worked my way up over the last couple of months to get up to the development squad, with the aim of getting to the podium squad and then competing at another Paralympics. So it's a pretty big changeover. So from going from using arms purely to now just using my leg and a little bit of arms, I suppose. But mainly my legs. It's quite a big transition to go from Paralympic skiing to cycling, but again, a lot of the training principles are the same. So it's very cardiovascular, like Paralympic skiing. So for me, I already have that fitness base. It's just transferring over to my leg. So as I said, I cycle single leg, which has its own challenges, but again, it's just like riding a bike. There's no other way of putting it. You just get on and your body figures out the balance. Again, your body is just amazing how it can repair itself, but also how it can adapt to different situations. So with cycling, I currently ride velodrome and road with the aim of doing multiple events again. So it'll be all the way from sprint events up to time trials of 60 kilometres. So again, there's a massive range of opportunity to race. So that is my goal. But also after the Paralympics, you get lots of weird and wonderful opportunities come your way. And there is one odd pitch out in here, Next Level Chef. I had got a message from a producer that does Gordon Ramsay cooking programs, and she had said there was a new Gordon Ramsay program coming out, Next Level Chef, and she read my story in Daily Record and thought that I've got such a unique story and there's not many Paralympic chefs, so she asked me to apply. So I applied for it and got onto the program. So out of about 3,000 people, there was a final 12 went on the show. So I cooked and met Gordon Ramsay, Paul Ainsworth and Nye Sharrington, and it was just the most incredible experience. I would say it was probably more stressful than the Paralympics. It was just stress from start to finish. And if you've not seen the programme, there's basically 3 kitchens stacked on top of each other. The bottom kitchen is like a basement, top kitchen is like the best kitchen you can imagine, and there's a lift that goes in between the platforms, and you have 30 seconds to grab your ingredients, and whatever you grab is what you've got for the full duration of your cooking. So it's a real incentive to kind of be switched on and just to grab stuff. It's on ITV and I'd recommend watching it. It is just insane. And again, just having the kind of opportunity to go and stuff like that just never would have came if I hadn't lost my leg. But it's also came because I've switched my mindset and said yes to things. Before my accident, I never really said yes to opportunities and maybe shied away from doing things. But now, any opportunity comes my way, I will grab it with both hands and go for it. For me, life is just too short. You have to live life and you have to go and explore the world. And for me, yeah, it's just been incredible. But thank you very much for listening. I'm sure if you have any questions, they can get relayed back to me, and I will be more than happy to answer any questions you may have. Again, this is only a small part of my story. There's still a lot to come. Again, I want to get to another Paralympics, and I don't really know where I want to go after sport, but I'm going to figure it out and just let life take its course. And yeah, thank you very much for listening.
Thank you, Callum. As mentioned at the start of the session, CPD sessions and a copy of the slides will be sent to you via email over the next couple of days. Kirsten and team are on it, so bear with us whilst we sort through today's delegates and get those emails out. Also, don't forget to complete our feedback form, which will pop up at the end of this webinar automatically. Enjoy the rest of your day, and we'll see you soon. Thank you.